Welcome everyone to this evening's gathering in this yogic field. We're going to begin the program with some beautiful quotes from various people on the power of tolerance. So welcome everyone once again. It was beautiful to read those different quotes from different people on the power of tolerance. And today's program is Tolerance, Making Peace Possible. And so you're very welcome to our 11th gathering, actually, of Yogic Silence, a transformative field. And today we'll be focusing on how tolerance can make peace possible as we honor the International Day of Tolerance. In 1996, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming the 16th of November as the International Day of Tolerance. This action followed the adoption of a Declaration of Principles on Tolerance by UNESCO's member states. And among other things, the declaration affirms that tolerance is neither an indulgence, concession, or putting up with things, nor indifference or a lack of concern. But it is respect and appreciation of the rich variety of our world's cultures, our forms of expression, and our ways of being human. Tolerance recognizes the universal human rights and fundamental freedoms of others. Tolerance is harmony in difference. It is not only a moral duty, it is a political and legal requirement. People are naturally diverse, and only tolerance can ensure the survival of mixed communities in every region of the globe. It is through dialogue and exchange, and through the practice of yogic silence, that our outlooks and ways of seeing the world can open up new vistas where we can find our way through and celebrate humanity by embracing differences, spreading kindness, and creating a world where everyone feels valued and accepted. Tolerance is the virtue that makes peace possible. It contributes to the replacement of a culture of war by a culture of peace. I encourage you, when you get the opportunity, to read UNESCO's Declaration of Principles on Tolerance and its 5 articles, which look at the meaning of tolerance, what it means at a state level, its social dimensions, the importance of education, and its commitment to actions. But for today, we will be experiencing the virtue of tolerance in our silence yogic field. And I am happy to hand over to Pratiba to introduce a short video, followed by some reflection with questions and a harvesting of ideas. We will then have closing remarks by Bob Perry from the Shri Chandra mission, who is also a member of the International Day of Yoga Committee at the UN, and we will close with a short meditation. So to introduce Pratiba shortly, she's a BK, a Brahma Kumari from South Africa, and has been on this path as a teacher and student for over 30 years. Thank you, Pratiba.
Thank you, Julia, and good evening to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you this evening, and particularly to explore this topic on tolerance. One of the deepest lessons we learned in South Africa was that there has to be tolerance, and tolerance as a power in order for healing to take place and for us to move forward. One of the quotations that was shared was very apt because it said acceptance, tolerance, and forgiveness go together. And yes, they're very much interrelated. And where does tolerance come from? It does come from taking the time to understand where each other comes from. So the little documentary that we're going to show you is really a conversation. It's called Improbable Pairs. And the idea behind it is when we take time to have a conversation, and although we may come from completely opposite ends of the spectrum, a deep dialogue between us will always help us to find the connecting points and help us to create understanding. And out of that understanding and acceptance of where each one is coming from, that it gives birth to tolerance, because true tolerance is just not about putting up with someone else, but it's about, for the sake of a higher meaning, that we find these connecting points to take us to a place that is of benevolence and growth and healing for all of us. So tolerance offers that opportunity for all of us. So I'm going to invite us just to observe this conversation, particularly during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. It was at that time that it offered opportunities for these quality of conversations between people who were in the struggle for independence, but from 2 different ends. And it allowed for a great deal of understanding to be created, but also created opportunity of working together for something that we all desired so deeply, a better country for all. So Improbable Pairs, and let's have a look at this short conversation.
My name's Neville Clarence. I come from Pretoria in South Africa.
I'm Abu Bakr Ismail. also known as Rashid. I come from Johannesburg in South Africa.
I came from a fairly wealthy family where we had 2 black servants. Even as a liberally minded English-speaking white person in the country, my parents didn't really know people other than so-called white people.
Even though we grew up as Indians culturally, in South Africa, the government at the time when we grew up had the policy of racial segregation, that Indians and coloureds, that is people of mixed race, and Africans were separated from whites.
There were 2 worlds in South Africa. There was the white world and there was the black world. We knew from our education to some degree about apartheid, but we were not exposed to the evils of apartheid. We were exposed to the theory.
We often saw the whites living in a certain way, the wealth they had, the privilege they had, and looked at the facilities that we had, and at the same time also looked at the kind of facilities that were available to African children. And we saw that there were differences inside all of it.
As a teenager, I thought, it would be really nice to say become a pilot. I joined the South African Air Force for the fun, for the excitement, to work with fast machines, aircraft. I didn't join the South African Air Force to, in some form of conscious attempt to be part of the apartheid maintenance machine, if you can describe it as that.
My father often spoke to us about the political situation inside of the country, about the policies of the then government, and always said that this was something that needed to be overcome, that we had to resist it. Whilst at university, I was very actively involved and in fact played an increasingly leading role amongst my friends, talking about things, having discussions, etc. And it was through that process that I actually came in contact with the ANC underground, when the children of Soweto were mowed down because of their protests against Afrikaans and against apartheid. For me, the moment had arrived. I went for military training, so this was then the entry into Umkhonto weSizwe. I went for a senior infantry commander's course, and thereafter I did a specialization in military engineering and explosives.
In the operational side that I worked with, there was very little political awareness. The pilots used to do a certain mission, they would fly out, they would be given a target, and they'd go out and drop bombs, and they would do a reconnaissance flight afterwards and take photographs and see if they'd hit their target. But there was never a question of really what that target was. How many women and children had you killed in that operation?
The Special Operations Unit had been put together very specifically to strike at strategic targets. The ANC was very determined that we wouldn't simply have a racial bloodbath. We targeted the military, which upheld the apartheid state.
We were fighting what we called a border war against Soviet-backed communist rebels. This is the kind of propaganda that was passed on to the military personnel, certainly the junior military personnel, that we were not there to maintain apartheid. In fact, that word in my 12 years, or certainly the first 10 years of my career as a junior officer in the South African Air Force, was never used.
We needed to find a situation where we had a huge concentration of military personnel. We came to the determination that we should carry out the attack against the South African Air Force headquarters.
I traveled by car to the South African Air Force headquarters building in the center of the city. We parked the car right outside the main entrance to the building. the car in front of me exploded. Instantly, I didn't see anything.
The windows were shattered, etc. And in fact, the Air Force building came very close to being condemned.
Having lost my sight in such a violent way made me realize how serious things really were in the country. I felt I needed now to do what I had to do, and that was to try and make a change perhaps from within the system. Once I joined the intelligence system, the harsh realities of the oppression was being exposed to me on a daily basis, and it left me absolutely shocked.
I'm proud to have been part of the liberation of my people. Yes, at times you sit back and think about whether it was all necessary. And the answer is a simple one. Had there not been apartheid, we would not have had to engage in that kind of thing.
Since the explosion, I think I became fascinated with an overwhelming desire to know who was behind the explosion, how did it happen, why.
On the first day of the Truth and Reconciliation hearings in Pretoria,
where they were going to specifically focus on the Pretoria car bomb explosion,
I had a message from a journalist through my lawyer who said basically that one of the victims wanted to meet with me.
it was very important for me personally to know that I don't bear any grudges and that I don't see him as an enemy.
To see Neville walking up blinded is a very, very moving thing.
It's so relieving to be able to walk around and shake the hand of a person who might have done something against you.
A meeting of the hearts. To be able to hold hands with someone whom you know has directly been affected by an operation that I'd planned.
It was a dream come true. It was a wonderful experience, and it's still not over. It's still happening.
It actually captured what the Truth and Reconciliation process was about. This is the beginning of something bigger, that we can walk down the roads and make the change.
People who are still bitter, who are still affected by the struggle, that they must simply look at Abu Baker and myself and say, look, well, we can do it. Why don't you do it?
And to everybody, I would say, there is hope, there is a future, and we can walk down the road and make a difference.
Thank you. I think that's quite a thought-provoking conversation to be an observer of. It gives us a lovely opportunity now to reflect on taking the lessons that we see through that conversation and begin to apply it in terms of our own lives and what we see tolerance and how tolerance plays itself out for us, and the healing that it allows for us in our own lives. So we have a reflective question now for all of you to just take some time to ponder on, and just to allow you to look at your own personal experience and begin to engage with that. So I'll just wait for the question to be brought up. So think of a time when you have had to exercise tolerance, either to a situation or in a relationship. reflect on the inner resources you had to draw on to exercise tolerance and what it meant for you. What was your experience of the process and outcome? So I'm going to give you a few minutes just to reflect quietly for yourself on your own personal experience of tolerance and what were the inner resources that it called for yourself. As you're reflecting on tolerance and your own personal experience on tolerance, I'm going to invite you to just write and share your reflections in the chat, please. Would be lovely to hear some of your reflections. I think we can all agree in some ways that revenge cripples us and never leads to lasting solutions. So really to, really reflect on where does tolerance of each other truly begin. And a lovely response from Julia that in order for there to be tolerance, it was necessary to draw on deep love from inside and have compassion for myself and the other. Yeah, very much so. Tolerance is a power of the soul as well as spiritual power, and it's rooted in love. Because from that inner oasis of love, it allows for a generosity of spirit and benevolence that I can reach out to others. Yeah. Any other thoughts would be lovely to hear. Also feel that there's a trajectory that takes us to tolerance. And as we seen in the video, that first we need to seek to understand each other. And one of the things in today's world is everyone is wanting to be heard, but no one truly listens. And it's only when we really listen to each other that it can allow for a deeper understanding to emerge of each other. And once there is that deeper understanding, then it offers us an opportunity for acceptance. Acceptance then leads to tolerance. And I was really feeling that, I think one of the quotations we had as well, that tolerance is the responsibility of those that hold a higher vision. Because why do I tolerate? Is because I hold a greater vision. A greater vision for not just the self, but for everyone, for all of us. A motivation is about lifting all of us to something higher in ourselves. So that always inspires the tolerance, because it's about taking all of us to a greater truth in ourselves, to be able to draw out a greater power in ourselves. Another input is reminding myself of my own goodness and drawing upon that strength, which helped me to understand and accept the other without judgment or prejudice. Yeah, I think when there's a lovely understanding and a motivation to serve, then tolerance becomes something that I'm able to keep that vision of serving as my higher purpose. And so it's about then working through and seeing how can we learn from each other. Yeah. And there's always beauty and opportunity to see that there's always a different perspective that I can learn from. And if I keep that openness, then that does allow for tolerance as well. Lovely. During a difficult situation, I had to learn to forgive myself and others involved to find peace. Yes. And I think that is very key, that a lot of the times our resistance to others is because of us being very hard on ourselves. So as we learn to forgive ourselves, then we can actually move on and forgive others and move on. Carmen is sharing, it is better to maintain self-respect and my inner peace than to try to prove to anyone that I am right. Right ultimately proves itself. Yes, I very much agree with you. I love this extract that I came across, that it is better to be kind than to be right. Because kindness in itself is right and will prove itself. Yeah. So being a mother required a lot of tolerance to take care of others who could not care for themselves, a feeling to not let others suffer. Yeah, beautiful, Linda. And I always admire mothers, that how the capacity to give so selflessly just emerges because there's love. Where does that capacity to give so selflessly emerge? Because there's love, and there's this kind of a vision that you hold of creating that environment that will help someone feel secure and safe and feel nurtured. So we can see that it's those elements of love that actually gives us the capacity to tolerate. Yeah. And when we lose the vision of love, that's when we start counting. That's when we start evaluating, and then we start comparing. And that's where the limitation comes in. So it's always so important to come back to that element of love, because yes, tolerance is rooted in love. Okay, I think if there aren't any further thoughts, I'm going to now invite Bob to share some of his thoughts and offer some closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you. I think there's one more that has shared. I'd like to read that before Bob. Just wait a minute. I have not mastered tolerance, but I have tolerance from a place of understanding why the person has a certain behavior, along with acceptance and belief that the person is doing the best they can with what they know. If I have no understanding of the person or situation, then I heavily rely on a high source. Thank you very much for that input. Okay, Bob, I'll hand it over to you now to share some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratiba. And my deep thanks for inviting me to this conversation. I come to this conversation from the perspective, or with the perspective of a longtime advocate, legal advocate, civil rights and civil liberties attorney. That's the perspective that informs my comments. And so I have to begin by talking a little bit about intolerance. And I expect, like you, we've all shared some shock at the rising level of intolerance, not only in the Mideast, a particularly brutal form of intolerance, but almost everywhere we look, it seems. Shocked by the intensity of the intolerance, the anger, the aggressiveness, almost primal in its intensity. Now, psychologists tell us that anger is often a response to fear. And at the deepest level, this fear is a reaction to two things. At the deepest level, a fear of physical violence or death, but also a fear of loss of something of great value. It could be a home, a house. It could also be fear of a loss of community, a fear of abandonment, of isolation, of being cast out, of being canceled. And I think, of course, these two fears are closely related. So a very strange thing I've seen in recent years in my work, I've observed intolerance rising, quite intense intolerance and conflict, even among members of the same tribe or group of social justice advocates. Quite intense personal upset over, belief or ideology or political strategy or who has a right to belong or not. And these are folks on the same team, on the same side of the argument. And so it's quite painful and perplexing. And so here's the deeper mystery to me here. At the same time, intolerance appears to be rising, manifesting at more intense levels. We witness, or I do, spiritual teachers, energy workers, those people with the capacity to see these types of things, tell us that there is more light, more spiritual energy on the planet than ever before. And so I ask, how to explain this? And the spiritual teachers are telling us that the structures by which we have created our tribes, our separate identities, no longer serve us. They have to go. Now, I've been reading recently about the moral order, the moral precepts that inform yoga, yoga as a philosophy, yoga as a contemplative practice. And of course, the very first principle of this philosophy is oneness, the inherent unity of all being. And my first teacher, my first spiritual teacher, who we knew affectionately as Shri, gave a talk once on this idea, this concept of morality. And he said, it's not two who make immorality. It's the 1 + 1 inside who are conducive to this immorality. And then he added, my understanding of immorality is where there is one, if you make it two, this is the first fall. Then begin all the interactions of this stupid world. Now, Shri, he could be very tough, and he was unyielding in matters of spiritual morality. So if I'm understanding these teachers, these spiritual guides correctly, the structures of separation are falling apart. And it seems to me this is one factor driving this heightened intolerance. We're simply terrified of losing our place, of losing our planet, of being hurt, of being abandoned, of losing our community. And so out of self-defense, out of a sense of self-protection, we weaponize our intolerance. So all the more important then, it seems to me, that we master the practice of intolerance. And that's what it is. It is a practice. Now, I have no hard data for this proposition, but I'm quite sure that people on this planet carry more tolerance than intolerance. But unlike intolerance, tolerance tends to be quiet, still, patient, accepting, less visible. And the most effective reformers, the most effective social justice advocates, in my experience, are those who know how to hold space in difficult conversation, hold space within the conflict. And I'm not talking, of course, about actual space. I'm talking about an energetic space. These folks hold energetic space for everyone in the field. And I think that's what practicing intolerance means. It's holding space. So I'll share a brief story about my first experience with peace advocates. And this goes way back to the early 1970s in Amherst, Massachusetts. Amherst is where the main campus of the University of Massachusetts sits. And every weekend, a group of townspeople would gather on the square under a massive tree on the green, and they had a sign calling for peace, for the end of the United States war against Vietnam. And I remember, I was like 21 years old. I remember seeing these folks standing in the park in silence with their sign. And I thought to myself, is this the best they can do? I was looking for a fight, right? And I just couldn't see the point. But of course, what these folks were doing was holding space. And tolerance is what creates that space. These folks standing on the green in Amherst knew something then that it took me many years to understand. That all great movements for social justice, for peace, begin with some greater collective capacity for empathy and for compassion. And that begins with open-hearted tolerance. That's what, many years later, I realized that's what these folks were teaching me. So I know Julia is going to lead us in a guided meditation, but I want to offer a short poem, just 22 words, by the Persian poet Hafiz. And the poem is about prayer. And meditation, I realize, is not prayer. Prayer is not meditation, but perhaps we can think of meditation as a state of presence in which we hold an affirmation of connection, of oneness, of tolerance. So here's the poem by Hafiz. I should not make any promises right now, but I know if you pray, somewhere in the world, something good will happen.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was really, really beautiful. Your remarks and also, of course, the short poem. So what I want to do now is do a very short meditation. And we're going to have an image of light to hold the space, so that each one of us here today, and there are 35 of us together, can hold the space in connection. This yogic field that we're coming together in is about connecting with the self inside, connecting with each other as a community, as a brotherhood, sisterhood, to hold a space where we all belong, a space of love and kinship. In this space, we belong together. There is no fear of loss, of division, of being other. In this space, we are equal. Equal in spirit. We are light. We meet each other in the awareness of this beautiful light that each one of us is. And our parent, our spiritual parent, is also light. In this space, our hearts meet. In this space, there is peace. Peace is possible. In this space, the light of hope reigns. Allowing us to experience the love and the peace of tolerance. Om Shanti. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much, Pratiba, Julia, and Bob, for taking us on such a beautiful journey this evening. I am at a loss to say how I'm feeling. Every bit of it was heart-touching, and I'm sure we're all leaving this evening with a deeper understanding of tolerance, not just on the external level, but our own inner tolerance. But before we come to a complete close this evening, we always share with you what's coming up next. Now, December is as much as there is all the festivities of the holidays, but it's also the month where human rights is observed. On December 10th is Human Rights Day. And for the entire month, what we're going to be doing is, in honor of the 75th Declaration of Human Rights, we are going to focus on each one of the articles within that declaration on a daily basis. There are 30 articles, and from December 1st to December 30th, we will focus on one of those articles every day. So December 1st, Article 1, December 2nd, Article 2, etc. But it wouldn't just be the human rights, but it will also be, we will also offer you this spiritual perspective to that human right. So the human right and the spiritual right. It's going to be a very interesting journey. And this is going to be done by providing you a video of about under 2 minutes. It will be available on our YouTube channel from 7 p.m. Eastern time the night before. So whichever part of the world you are, you will be able to get your video in time to begin your day. What will be done is that, interestingly enough, our hand gestures, actually, if they're positioned in a certain way, illustrate these various articles within the Declaration of Human Rights. So these hand gestures, or the mudras, as it is known as in the Eastern traditions, will be displayed to us. So we will be learning more about the human right, more about the spiritual right, and a little bit more about our hand gestures. So we welcome you to be part of this journey as we honor the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights by being part of this daily video. The YouTube channel is there on this little flyer, and we'll put it in the chat also. And along with that, if you can please mark your calendar for December 19th, it's a Tuesday, where we will talk a little bit more about the human rights and spiritual rights in a program like this one, Yogic Silence. So that's coming up for us in December. So once again, a big thank you, and may you continue to share your energies of tolerance. may we continue to share our tolerance wherever we go. Om Shanti.
Thank you.